Golden promises, the autumn leaves crunched beneath Mira Hartwell's worn flats as she hurried up the marble steps of the Whitmore Foundation building. She tugged at her modest black dress, the same one she'd worn to her grandmother's funeral. 2 years prior, and checked her watch. The literacy fundraiser had already begun, and she could hear the gentle murmur of conversation drifting through the ornate doors. Mira had almost declined the invitation. A third-grade teacher from Pine Ridge, Vermont, had little in common with Manhattan's elite philanthropists. But when the foundation specifically requested her presence after her innovative reading program had garnered national attention, she couldn't refuse the opportunity to secure funding for her students. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and designer gowns that cost more than Mira's annual salary. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and found herself gravitating toward the silent auction display where signed first editions caught her eye. "Remarkable, isn't it?" a warm voice said beside her. That particular Steinbeck belonged to the author himself. Mira turned to find a man in his early 30s studying the same display. Unlike the other guests draped in obvious wealth, he wore a simple navy suit and seemed genuinely interested in the books rather than their monetary value. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it, and his brown eyes held an intensity that made her forget about the intimidating crowd. "I've read of Mice and Men to my students every year for the past 5 years," Myra replied, surprised by how easily conversation flowed. "They always ask why Lenny couldn't just find a different job." The man laughed, a genuine sound in a room full of polite chuckles. "What do you tell them?" "That sometimes the world isn't built for people who see it differently, but that doesn't make their dreams less valid." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that went deeper than small talk. "I'm Julian Cross," he said, extending his hand. Myra's breath caught. Even she, living in her small-town bubble, knew that name. Cross Technologies had revolutionized educational software, making learning accessible to millions of children worldwide. "Myra Hartwell," she managed, shaking his hand and trying not to think about how her calloused fingers must feel against his smooth ones. "The teacher who created the Reading Bridge program," Julian said, his face lighting up. "I've been following your work. What you've accomplished with limited resources is extraordinary." Heat rose in Mira's cheeks. She wasn't used to praise, especially from someone whose company had donated tablets to schools across the country. Just connecting kids with stories that mattered to them. That's exactly what makes it revolutionary. Julian's voice carried conviction. "Too many people overcomplicate education. You understood that connection comes first." They spent the next hour talking about books, teaching, and the magic that happened when children discovered they loved learning. Julian asked thoughtful questions about her methods, shared stories of his own struggles in school, and listened with an attention that made Myra feel like she was the only person in the room. When the evening's program began, didn't return to what was surely a prominent table near the front. Instead, he remained beside Mira in the back, occasionally leaning over to whisper observations that made her stifle laughter during particularly pompous speeches. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" he asked as the evening wound down. If you're not heading back to Vermont immediately," Mira hesitated. Men like Julian Cross didn't date elementary school teachers from small towns, but something in his expression, hopeful, almost vulnerable, made her nod. "I'd like that." As she rode the train back to Vermont the next morning, Mira stared out at the changing landscape and wondered if she'd imagined the electricity she'd felt. But when her phone buzzed with a text from Julian, asking about her favorite coffee shop in Pine Ridge, she realized their story was just beginning. Sanctuary and shadows, the morning sickness had finally subsided. Mira still found herself exhausted by mid-afternoon. At 4 months pregnant, her body was changing in ways that made her usual energetic teaching style more challenging. She rubbed her small but noticeable bump as she organized reading materials for the next day's lesson. "You look tired, honey," Emma Pierce observed, settling into one of the tiny plastic chairs that furnished Myra's classroom. Emma had been Myra's closest friend since college, and her weekly visits had become a cherished routine since Myra's marriage to Julian 6 months ago. "Julian thinks I'm pushing myself too hard," Mira admitted, stacking picture books with careful precision. keeps suggesting I take some time off. Maybe visit that wellness retreat in Tuscany he found. Emma raised an eyebrow. Tuscany? That seems a bit extravagant for a baby moon. You know, Julian wants everything to be perfect. Myra's voice carried the warm contentment of a woman still amazed by her good fortune. He says the Serenity Hill Sanctuary specializes in prenatal wellness. Fresh air, meditation, organic everything. And he can't go with you because the Singapore Tech Summit, supposedly crucial for the new educational platform launch? Myra shrugged, though Emma caught a flicker of disappointment in her expression. He'll join me afterward for a few days. Emma nodded, but something nagged at her. Julian had been traveling more frequently lately, always with urgent explanations and apologetic kisses. She'd noticed how his phone seemed permanently attached to his hand, how he stepped away to take calls even during intimate family dinners. That evening, Emma helped Myra pack for her trip, folding maternity clothes and pregnancy books into the designer luggage Julian had insisted on buying. When Julian's phone buzzed on the nightstand, Mira was in the bathroom, and Emma's eyes inadvertently caught the screen. Can't wait for tomorrow. The yacht is perfect. Love you, V. Emma's blood chilled. She glanced toward the bathroom, hearing Mira humming softly, then back at the phone. The message had already disappeared from the lock screen, but the sender's initial burned in her memory. Everything okay? Mira emerged, glowing with the happiness of a woman who believed she was living a fairy tale. Perfect, Emma lied, forcing a smile. Thinking how lucky that baby is to have you as a mom. The next morning, Julian drove Mira to the airport himself, his goodbye lingering and tender. Emma watched from her car as he held Mira close, whispering what looked like sweet promises. To anyone observing, he appeared to be the devoted husband, seeing off his pregnant wife. But Emma couldn't shake the image of that text message. 3 days later, she sat across from Marcus Reed in a coffee shop, 2 towns over from Pine Ridge. Marcus came recommended by a lawyer friend, discreet, thorough, and expensive. Emma had used her savings from her job as a librarian to hire him, telling herself she was protecting her best friend. I need to know if Julian Cross is where he says he is, she told Marcus, sliding a folder across the table containing Julian's travel itinerary and recent photos. My friend is pregnant and trusting, and I have reason to believe her husband might be lying to her. Marcus studied the information with professional detachment. At 42, he'd seen enough cheating spouses to recognize the signs Emma described. The Singapore summit is real, he said after checking his laptop, but attending it would be easy enough to verify or fake. How long would it take to know for sure? Give me 72 hours. If he's not where he claims to be, I'll find out where he actually is. Meanwhile, Mira settled into her suite at Serenity Hills, breathing in the lavender-scented air and marveling at the rolling hills visible from her window. Dr. Helena Moore, the retreat's director, personally welcomed her with herbal tea and a pregnancy-safe spa menu. Your husband spoke so lovingly about you when he made the reservation, Dr. Moore mentioned as they toured the facilities. He wanted to ensure every detail would support your well-being. Mira smiled, one hand resting on her bump. Julian's thoughtfulness still amazed her. Even apart, he was taking care of her, creating a sanctuary where she could rest and prepare for motherhood. She spent her days in prenatal yoga classes, nature walks, and quiet moments journaling about her hopes for their child. The other guests were sophisticated women from around the world, many also pregnant, all seeking the same peaceful respite from their busy lives. But back in Vermont, Emma paced her apartment, checking her phone obsessively for Marcus's updates. On the second day, he sent a brief text. He's not in Singapore. Still tracking. By the third day, Emma's worst fears were confirmed. Her phone rang just as she was leaving the library, Marcus's number appearing on the screen. Found him, Marcus said without preamble. And Emma, you're going to want to sit down for this. Betrayal unveiled. The Mediterranean sun cast golden ripples across the water as Marcus Reed adjusted his telephoto lens from the Marina Cafe. He'd been watching Julian Cross's yacht, the Meridian, for 2 days, documenting everything through his camera. What he'd captured would shatter an innocent woman's world, but Marcus had learned long ago that truth, however painful, was kinder than continued deception. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Mira's been asking if I've heard. From Julian? She says he's been too busy with meetings to call much. I feel sick lying to her. Marcus understood Emma's anguish. In his 15 years as a private investigator, he'd delivered news that ended marriages, destroyed families, and changed lives forever. But he'd also seen what happened when betrayal remained hidden, the slow poison of lies that infected everything they touched. Through his lens, he watched Julian emerge from the yacht's cabin, his hair tousled from sleep, wearing only swim shorts. Behind him came Victoria Sterling, draped in a silk robe that barely covered her long legs. Marcus had researched her thoroughly. 31 years old, marketing executive at Cross Technologies. MBA from Wharton, and according to social media, single. Victoria wasn't just beautiful. She was Julian's professional equal in ways that Myra, with her simple teaching background, could never be. Marcus watched as Julian pulled Victoria into his arms. Their kiss passionate and familiar, the embrace of lovers, not colleagues conducting an affair. The photos Marcus captured told a devastating story. Julian and Victoria sharing intimate dinners on the yacht's deck. Victoria wearing what appeared to be an engagement ring on her right hand. Julian's hands protective over Victoria's still flat stomach in a gesture Marcus recognized from countless surveillance jobs, the unconscious touch of an expectant father. His blood ran cold as the implication hit him. Was Victoria pregnant too? Marcus lowered his camera and called Emma immediately. I need you to sit down, he said when she answered. This is worse than we thought. How much worse? Emma's voice. It was barely a whisper. Julian's not just having an affair. Based on what I'm seeing, this relationship predates his marriage to Mira and Emma. I think the other woman might be pregnant too. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice hollow. What do we do? Mira's so happy. She sends me pictures every day of her ultrasounds, talks about baby names, dreams about their future together. We tell her the truth. She deserves to know before she gets in any deeper, but she's pregnant and alone in Italy. This could Emma. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. I've been doing this job for 15 years. The longer deception continues, the more damage it causes. Myra strikes me as stronger than you think. That evening, Marcus compiled his evidence, photographs, financial records showing payments to Victoria's apartment, hotel receipts from previous business trips that matched Victoria's travel schedule, and phone records revealing hundreds of calls and texts between Julian and Victoria throughout his courtship and marriage to Mira. Meanwhile, at Serenity Hills, Mira sat in the meditation garden, her hands resting on her growing bump as she watched the sunset paint the Tuscan hills in shades of gold and crimson. Her phone showed several missed calls from Emma, which was unusual. Emma knew the retreat encouraged minimal technology use. When Mira finally called back, Emma's voice sounded strained. Mira, honey, I need to tell you something important. You somewhere private? I'm in my room. Emma, you sound upset. What's wrong? I hired a private investigator to check on Julian. The words hit Mira like a physical blow. You did what, Emma? Why would you? Because I saw a text on his phone. From someone signed V, talking about a yacht and saying love you? Emma's words tumbled out in a rush. Mira, Julian isn't in Singapore. He's on his yacht in the Mediterranean with another woman. Mira's hand flew to her mouth. That's impossible. You're mistaken. Julian wouldn't. I'm sending you the photos now. I'm so sorry, honey. I'm so sorry.
Mira's
Phone chimed with incoming messages. With trembling fingers, she opened the first photo. Julian, unmistakably Julian, kissing a stunning brunette against the backdrop of azure water. Then another. The same woman wearing Julian's Harvard class ring. Another. Julian's hand resting protectively on the woman's stomach. The phone slipped from Mira's numb fingers, clattering onto the marble floor.
Ow.
She stared at the cracked screen, where Julian's betrayal stared back at her in high-definition color. Dr. Helena Moore found her. 20 minutes later, curled on her bathroom floor, sobbing with the kind of grief that comes from a shattered worldview. Mrs. Cross, I heard ... Are you all right? I need to go home, Mira whispered, her voice raw. I need to go home right now. But even as she spoke the words, Mira realized she no longer knew where home was. The life she'd built with Julian, the future she'd dreamed for their child, it had all been a lie. As Dr. Moore helped her to her feet and began making arrangements for her immediate departure, Mira felt something harder than grief settling in her chest. She was going home, but not to collapse. She was going home to plan, retry you. Rising from ashes, the flight from Rome to Boston felt endless. Myra sat in first class. Julian's money paying for her escape from his lies, staring out at the clouds, while her mind raced through possibilities. The other passengers probably saw a pregnant woman traveling alone and assumed she was heading toward something joyful. They couldn't know she was flying toward the wreckage of her marriage. Emma met her at Logan Airport, her face creased with worry and guilt. "Mira, I'm so sorry." "Maybe I should have. You saved me," Mira interrupted, surprising them both with the steadiness in her voice. "You saved me from wasting more years on a lie." During the drive back to Vermont, Mira called Marcus Reed directly. His voice was professional but kind when he answered. "Mrs. Cross, I'm deeply sorry about the circumstances, but I'm glad Emma felt she could trust me with this situation. I need to hire you myself now," Mira said. "I need to know everything. How long this has been going on, where Julian's money really goes, what else he's hiding. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am. But I have to ask Carr, you sure you're ready for what we might find?" Mira looked down at her growing belly, where their child was developing, innocent of the chaos surrounding their creation. "I'm ready." Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus uncovered a web of deception that went far deeper than a simple affair. Victoria Sterling wasn't just Julian's mistress. She was his business partner in several ventures he'd hidden from Myra. Financial records showed money being funneled into offshore accounts, property purchases in Victoria's name, and what appeared to be systematic preparation for a life that didn't include Myra. The most devastating discovery came when Marcus traced Victoria's medical records, legally obtained through a contact at the hospital where she'd been treated. Victoria had suffered a miscarriage 3 months before. Julian's wedding to Myra. The timeline suggested she'd been pregnant during Julian's courtship of his future wife. He was hedging his bets, Marcus explained during one of their meetings at a discreet cafe outside Pine Ridge. Pursuing you while maintaining his relationship with Victoria. When she lost the baby, he went through with the wedding but never ended things with her. Mira absorbed this information with a calmness that surprised even her. "What about the financial irregularities you mentioned? That's where it gets interesting." "Julian's been moving assets, but not just personal ones. There's evidence he's been using Cross Technologies funds for personal expenses, including Victoria's apartment, jewelry, even this yacht trip. If the board knew, ... They don't? Not yet. But they would have legal grounds to remove him if they found out." Mira's attorney, Rachel Chang, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation destroying unfaithful husbands in divorce court. She reviewed Marcus's evidence with the hungry look of a predator spotting wounded prey. "This is better than I dared hope," Rachel said, spreading photographs and financial documents across her conference table. "We have adultery, financial malfeasance, and emotional distress. Plus you're pregnant, which plays well with judges and juries." "I don't want to destroy him," Mira said quietly. "I want to protect myself and my baby. Sometimes those are the same thing." When Mira went into labor on a snowy February evening, she was alone by choice. She'd told Julian she was visiting Emma, maintaining the fiction of their marriage until her legal strategy was complete. Emma held her hand through 12 hours of labor, and when daughter Lily finally arrived, dulled pink cheeks and dark hair, like her father, Mira felt a fierce protective love that crystallized her resolve. Julian returned from his business trip 3 days after Lily's birth. Full of apologies for missing the delivery and bearing expensive gifts, he cooed over his daughter with what seemed like genuine emotion, and for a moment, Mira almost wavered. Then she remembered Victoria's hand on her own belly, Julian's protective gesture, and the future he'd been building without her. "We need to talk," Mira said, after Julian had settled into his home office, Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Of course, darling. I know I've been traveling too much. Once this Singapore deal is finalized, Julian..." Myra's voice cut through his practiced excuses. She placed a manila envelope on his desk, her movements careful and deliberate. I know about Victoria. The color drained from Julian's face. For a moment, he looked like he might deny everything, but something in Mira's expression stopped him. Mira, I can explain no explanations. Just listen. She opened the envelope, revealing photographs of him with Victoria. I know about the yacht, the offshore accounts, company funds you've been misusing, and the baby Victoria lost while you were proposing to me. Julian's hand shook as he reached for the photographs. How did you? It doesn't matter how. What matters is what happens next. Myra's voice remained steady, though her heart was racing. You have two choices. We can divorce quietly, you provide the settlement amount Rachel Chang has calculated, and you remain in Lily's life as a father. Or this evidence goes to your board of directors, the SEC, and every major business publication. Julian stared at her as if seeing a stranger. You're not the woman I married. No, Mira agreed, shifting Lily to her shoulder. I'm stronger then. The woman you married, you made sure of that. The silence stretched between them, filled with the soft sounds of their daughter's breathing and the distant hum of their expensive house that would soon be sold. Its proceeds divided according to Rachel Chang's meticulous calculations. Finally, Julian reached for a pen. New foundations 3 years later. Mira stood at the podium of the grand ballroom at the Marriott, looking out at an audience of 500 women. The banner behind her read Second Chances Foundation, 3rd Annual Gala, and the room buzzed with the energy of survivors who had transformed their pain into purpose. When I discovered my husband's betrayal while pregnant and alone in a foreign country, Myra began, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone, I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine how I'd raise a child alone, how I'd rebuild from nothing, or how I'd ever trust again. In the front row, Emma dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Beside her sat Dr. Helena Moore, who'd flown in from Tuscany specifically for tonight's event. The retreat director had become an unexpected ally, offering Mira a standing invitation to return whenever she needed peace. Here's what I learned, Mira continued, her gaze finding familiar faces throughout the crowd. Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I built something better than I'd ever dreamed. The Second Chances Foundation had grown beyond Mira's wildest expectations. What had started as a way to channel her divorce settlement into helping other betrayed women had become a nationally recognized organization. They provided legal aid, financial literacy courses, job training, and emotional support to women rebuilding their lives after domestic abuse, financial manipulation, or infidelity. Tonight's gala would raise over $2 million, our keynote. Speaker tonight needs no introduction to many of you, Mira said. Stepping aside as a woman in her 60s approached the podium, Judge Patricia Reeves has been championing women's rights in family court for 30 years. As Judge Reeves began her speech about the legal reforms the foundation had helped implement,
Iris slipped from the stage and made her way to the back
of the room, where Marcus Reed stood watching with quiet pride. You did good up there, he said softly as she approached. At 45, Marcus had aged well, his graying temples adding distinguished character to his weathered face. The past 3 years had deepened their friendship in ways neither had expected. Did good, Mira corrected, adjusting the simple gold band on her left ring finger, wedding ring she'd chosen herself just 6 months ago. None of this would exist without your investigation. Marcus had been there through everything. The divorce proceedings, the foundation's launch, Lily's first steps, and countless late nights when Mira wondered if she was crazy to think she could make a difference. Somewhere between professional respect and shared purpose. They'd fallen in love not with the desperate intensity of Mira's first marriage, but with the steady certainty of two people who'd seen each other's worst moments and chosen to stay. Mama. 3-year-old Lily came running through the crowd, her dark curls bouncing as she launched herself into Mira's arms. Julian's daughter had his eyes, but Mira's determined chin, and she'd inherited neither parent's tendency toward deception. You see all the pretty dresses? Lily asked, twirling in her own miniature gown, a gift from Emma, who'd become the world's most devoted honorary aunt? I did. Are you having fun with Aunt Emma? Marcus taught me how to tie my shoes properly, Lily announced proudly, lifting one foot to display her handiwork. He says knots should hold but not be impossible to untie. Mira met Marcus's eyes over Lily's head, reading the deeper meaning in his simple lesson. Good relationships, like good knots, should be secure but not binding, strong enough to weather storms, but flexible enough to allow growth. Julian had remarried Victoria 8 months after his divorce from Mira was finalized. They lived in California now, where Julian had started a new company after being forced out of Cross Technologies when the board discovered his financial improprieties. He video-called Lily every Sunday and sent support payments punctually, but he'd become more of a distant figure than a father. Lily didn't seem to mind. Her world was full of love from people who'd chosen to be there. Myra, Marcus, Emma, and the extended family of Foundation volunteers who'd watched her grow up in conference rooms and charity events. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Reeves announced. From the stage, I'd like to invite our founder back up here for the evening's final presentation. Mira handed Lily to Marcus and returned to the podium, where a large check weighted the proceeds from tonight's silent auction. 3 years ago, I thought strength meant enduring whatever life threw at me, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. I thought loyalty meant staying silent about betrayal, and love meant accepting less than I deserved. She looked out at the audience of women who'd found their own versions of strength, who'd rebuilt from their own versions of betrayal. But real strength is knowing when to walk away. Real loyalty is to yourself and your children. In real love, her eyes found Marcus in the crowd, holding Lily, who was now asleep against his shoulder. Real love is what remains when all the illusions fall away.
The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes.
As Mira left the stage, for the final time that evening, she passed the photo display that had become a tradition at Foundation events, pictures of the women they'd helped, accompanied by brief updates on their new lives. Sarah, who'd left an abusive marriage and now owned 3 successful bakeries. Janet, who'd discovered her husband's gambling addiction and rebuilt her credit to buy her first home. Diana, who'd survived financial abuse and now taught money management courses. Each photo represented a second chance seized, Foundation rebuilt on solid ground. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Mira found herself on the hotel's outdoor terrace with Marcus and a sleeping Lily. The city sparkled below them, full of light and possibility. Any regrets? Marcus asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. Mira considered the question seriously. 3 years ago, she'd been a naive teacher who thought love meant overlooking. Red flags and trust meant never asking questions. Now she was a Foundation director, a published author, a woman who'd turned her greatest betrayal into her greatest triumph. None, she said finally. Every terrible thing that happened led me here. Led me to you, to this work, to the person I was meant to become. Marcus kissed the top of her head, and Lily stirred slightly in his arms, smiling in her sleep. In the distance, church bells chimed midnight, marking the beginning of another day full of second chances. Mira Hartwell Reedsheed kept her maiden name professionally, but taken. Marcus's surname in marriage had learned that sometimes the best foundations are built on the ruins of what came before. Sometimes, if you're very lucky, what rises from those ashes is more beautiful than anything you dared to dream.